There's a low security presence just outside the Pietermaritzburg High Court this morning. In fact, the court is expected to rule on former President Jacob Zuma's plea for lead prosecutor Billy Downer's recusal. Zuma accuses Downer and the National Prosecuting Authority of being biased against him. Let's get your sense of the situation on the ground. Bring in our reporters at this hour, Karinda, Jagmohan and Ziyanda Ngcobo, joining us now from the High Court itself. And Ziyanda, perhaps let's begin with you. Interesting that the state of affairs just outside court is relatively calm. Perhaps that may have something to do with the fact that the Jacob Zuma Foundation has already announced that the former president is unlikely to be at court today.
Certainly, Ziyanda, that you'll recall that the former president is out on medical parole, so he has certain conditions that he has to adhere to. In fact, that decision to grant a medical parole is under review. The DA Helen Suzman Foundation as well as AfriForum are seeking to actually get the reasoning behind him being granted medical parole. So he is treading quite carefully. However, inside the court, though, it will be expected that Judge Piet will ask then why the former president isn't in court today, especially since, he actually was out and about at the Pietermaritzburg police station where he actually opened a case against Billy Downer in anticipation, or just days before, I should say, before this judgment is handed down. And that's also, I guess, a part of the strategy that is being adopted by the former president, that if he loses the judgment here today, even when the trial does begin, they will still be able to cast aspersions on the character of Billy Downer by virtue of the fact that he is currently being investigated by authorities.
Right. Karinda, let me bring you into the discussion. Today is also important in the context of what happened last week when the former president, of course, went to a police station there in Pietermaritzburg to lay charges against the same Billy Downer, whose fate in some respects today hangs in the balance.
Indeed, well, we just first want to go handheld to kind of show you the scene outside the Pietermaritzburg High Court and the security presence that's here. As we started this crossing, some police vehicles arrived and they're about to set up barbed wire just near the court. Now, we saw this at other court appearances as well regarding this matter, with barbed wire being set around the perimeter of the court. This just in case there is a number of supporters that will come through. But at this point, it doesn't seem the case. It's still quiet outside court. It's just the parking lot area that has been blocked off. No stage has been set up. So because the former president is not expected to be here in person, we can then say we're not expecting a number of crowds as we usually see when the former president arrives at court or at any other venue for that matter. But in the meanwhile, though, what stands to see is what will happen following this judgment. If indeed Billy Downer is removed as the lead prosecutor, as per the request, this appeal by the former president Jacob Zuma, what will be the next step going forward? It was assumed that there would be political figures arriving here today to sort of lend their support to the former president and the arguments that he's making. He claims that not just Billy Downer is biased against him and has leaked information, sensitive and confidential information, to the media, but also going on to say that the entire NPA has been biased against him and that the charges should not be standing against him. But of course then, legal experts have spoken out in the media questioning how that part of the appeal could be won over by the former president, simply because if the NPA cannot prosecute him, then who would be able to do this, especially on the corruption charges he's facing. So we'll be outside court. Usually, I must tell you, sometimes we see a very handful, a small group of supporters coming in their political regalia to see what's happening at this court, hearing that this matter is at court today. But that is usually going to happen around 10 o'clock to midday, when court matters are expected to actually get underway and judgment would be handed down at the time.
Karinda, Jagmohan, thanks very much indeed. Nice scene setter there. Let's take you once again back closer to the courtroom itself and bring in Ziyanda Ngcobo. Ziyanda, let's perhaps unpack the possible permutations inside court today. Stakes quite high, because essentially what Jacob Zuma is arguing here is if Billy Downer is stripped of his title to prosecute, he should be acquitted. That, I imagine, is the fundamental question that Judge Kun is going to have to ask himself whilst deciding on which way to go in this matter.
Absolutely, and we've actually seen, if you just reflect on the conduct of Judge Pietermaritzburg at various points at which he's been overseeing this matter, quite measured, being able to also, if I could say, assess, weigh up in some aspects the political implications of certain decisions that he makes. Not to say, however, that the law or the judiciary gets involved in politics, but understanding who former President Jacob Zuma is and understanding, the ramifications of certain things. I'm referring, for an example, when the former president was incarcerated in July, and the matter was of the special plea, the oral evidence being led in the special plea, Zuma's legal team requesting a 3-week postponement because he was at the Escort Correctional Facility, and at the time they had said that they weren't able to gain access to their clients. So one expects that Judge Pietermaritzburg will also, weigh up then, of course, this matter. We've seen it being by the NPA, withdrawing charges, reinstating the charges, withdrawing them again. It's reached the Supreme Court of Appeal. This matter has seen so many twists and turns that this decision, this judgment that he's going to hand down today really will actually determine whether or not we'll see, after nearly 2 decades, evidence being led, witnesses being called to the stand, and whether actually, there's actually enough evidence against former President Jacob Zuma to prove that he is guilty of racketeering, money laundering and fraud. Also keeping in mind, Ayanda, that it's evidence that's been led in this court has also reflected how Billy Downer was against Bulelani Ngcobo, the former National Director of Public Prosecution's decision not to trial Schabir Shaik and Zuma together. That's also actually now formed part of the defense that's been mounted by Zuma to say that, well, this is very clear that there was never any evidence, and that the reinstatement of these charges years after Schabir Shaik was prosecuted is an indication that this is nothing but a political witch hunt. So certainly all those factors need to be considered, and really, if, as you've already mentioned, the former president is granted that special plea, he would immediately be acquitted of all charges.
Ziyanda Ngcobo, thanks very much indeed. Our senior reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo, and our Karinda Jagmohan, both outside the Pietermaritzburg High Court at strategic positions as we count down to that judgment finally being delivered.